not starting yet.
I had to walk all the way back down, man. Everybody just had his blanks.
Thank you. You're welcome. It was clean.
Another summer day has come and gone away. In Paris alone, but I wanna go home. Maybe surrounded by a million people, I still feel all alone. Just wanna go home. Oh, I miss you, you know. And I've been keeping all the letters that I wrote to you. Each one in line two. I'm fine, baby, how are you? Well, I would say them, but I know that it's just not enough. My words were cold and flat, and you deserve more than that. Another airplane, another sunny place. I'm lucky, I know, but I wanna go home. I got to go home. Let me go home. I'm just too far from where you are. I wanna come home. And I feel just like I'm living someone else's life. It's like I just stepped outside when everything was going right. And I know just why you could not come along with me. That this was not your dream, but you always believed in me. Another winter day has come and gone away. It either Paris or Rome, and I wanna go home. Let me go home. And I'm surrounded by a million people. I still feel alone. Let me go home. Oh, I miss you, you know. Let me go home. I've had my run, baby, I'm done. I gotta go home. Let me go home. It'll all be alright. I'll be home tonight. I'm coming back home.
Please rise in body and or spirit as we sing together our opening hymn, God of Grace, God of Glory.
Round
Please be seated. And welcome home. A couple of announcements. You may have noticed on your way in the offering plates are by the door, so please feel free to address them on your way by. Also, the office hours for the summer here at church will be Monday through Thursday from 9 to 3. And our food pantry has reopened. So we are accepting donations on Mondays from 9 to 12, and pickup for our clients would be Thursdays from 10 to 1. And that is all I have in the way of announcements. But now it's time to come together in prayer. Loving God, we are so grateful to be gathered here this morning in this place with you and with each other. We ask your blessing on us this morning and pray that you help us to open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to worship you. Be with those of us who are still at home for whatever reason, and bless them. Help us all to be aware of those who are struggling with COVID, struggling with anxiety, struggling with illness, struggling with loneliness, and has been made so clear in recent days, struggling for respect and fairness and justice. We are so keenly aware of those who have been marginalized by our society through no fault of their own, but simply by being born a color that is different. Help us to right the wrongs that have so long endured. Help us to engage. Help us to speak. Help us to understand. There are hundreds of years of wrong attitudes that have been ingrained in our culture. Help us to see beyond ourselves and to act in whatever way we are able in order to be your instruments of change. We know, O God, that you want nothing but love for each and every one of us. May we be examples of that love in our actions, which serve to acknowledge the pains of injustice and to love all of our sisters and brothers. Keep us mindful of the words of Micah, who says, "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, lest we fail our call from you, lest we fail our call from you. And we bring before you now the special petitions and praises of our own church family. We give you thanks for recovery from COVID of Helen Butler, and that Sterling Village is now virus-free. We thank you for the continued healing of Deb Millette, who has been able to return to work. We thank you that Deb Walker's mom, Mrs. Holford, has finished her rehab and has been able to return to her much-loved, familiar surroundings at the manor on the hill. We thank you for our ability to use technology to reach out to those unable to come in. We thank you for our graduates and all graduates as we honor their achievements. And we lift up those of us who are struggling, those with cancer, Parkinson's, heart issues, diabetes, anxiety, loneliness, fatigue, financial worries, and just the stress of life today. We lift up 6-year-old Amelia Zach, who is being tested for Crohn's disease. And we pray, O God, that you be with our leaders. Give them sensitivity and wisdom. Help them to make wise and safe choices. decisions that directly affect us all. We turn to you now in the silence of our hearts, for it is in that space we can share our deepest needs and our deepest thanks. We can lift up to you names not mentioned, needs not addressed, gratitude for prayers answered, and patience for those not yet, confession of our failings, and commitment to do better. Hear us now in our silence. Loving God, we are so grateful for your care for us. Help us to care for each other. We pray all of these things with the prayer Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
I hate this thing. Derek asked earlier this week if Lee and I would be the second family to come up. You guys did a beautiful job last week. I've got a few things written down. Believe me, I won't take a lot of time. I broke it down into 3 categories. Derek gets adjusted. Thank you, Derek. Three categories of challenges for me. Any aha moments that I might have had during the last 3 months, and where I found God. The challenge is, the single greatest challenge for me during quarantine, maybe for most of you too, was the isolation from just about everything that I was used to. If you drove down I-90 towards Worcester, there were times when there was absolutely nobody on the road. It was like you were in a sci-fi movie where, nobody else existed. It was kind of spooky. Aha moments, I think the single most, for me, irritating aspect was the grocery store in the beginning. The first time I went in after the quarantine started, people were filling their carts, buying 3 or 4 times more than they ever would, which meant that other people who really needed it weren't going to get it. And for me, it said how easily society could devolve into chaos over something like this. And I thought, my God, if we had a real situation, where would we be? Hopefully in a better place. Where I found God, in the last 3 months, I've done a lot of praying. I had a lot of time to do that. My prayer list grew exponentially during that time. I also think I became more introspective during that time because I couldn't go anywhere because Leah and I are in that group that if you're over 65, you better stay home, and we did. So it gave me a little, not even a little, a lot of time to think. Leah and I were so thankful for Derek, Dan, and Sean, and others that they could put together the Sunday morning services on a thing so that we could all watch. And I guess that was where I found God the most. We couldn't be here with all of you, sadly, but at least we could be together watching the service.
Okay, I shouldn't probably admit any of the stuff that I'm about to share with you, because you don't know me, you haven't known me very long, but I am a world-class worrier and an Olympic gold overthinker. This time of pandemic and quarantine has given me the opportunity to hone my skills. The divisive atmosphere in our country has been fertile ground for my superpowers. I can literally worry and overthink anything. Where God has been in all of this, right beside me. Yes, rolling his eyes while listening to me, but listening no matter what. God offers us peace and strength. When we feel like we can't go on, we can turn to him for service. It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way secure.
Our scripture reading this morning comes from the 58th chapter of the prophet Isaiah. Shout it aloud. Do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion and their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken my commandments. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet, on the day of your fasting, you do as you please, and you exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast in this way and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only one day for you to humble yourselves? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to me? This is the kind of fasting I have chosen for you. To loose the chains of injustice, to untie the cords of the unrighteous yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? If you do this, then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, "Here I am." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you and satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. And then the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Finally, a reflection on justice by Bishop Desmond Tutu. Exclusion is never the way forward on our shared paths to freedom and justice. Here ends our readings for this morning. And if the children might please come forward, and I'll show you where to sit. Girls, went to here. Your good boys went forever. Perfect. And I'll go right here, respectable distance away. Can you hear me now? Okay, so, good morning. Not quite good afternoon, but it's very good to see all of you here. So, I just read some stuff from the Bible, right? And sometimes stuff from the Bible can be a little hard to understand. Me too. But one of the jobs of being a minister is that we read the Bible and we try to explain it to people in a way that helps them to understand it. So the passage that we just heard was from Isaiah. And it was fairly long. Do you have any idea what it was about? It's okay if you don't. It comes down to something pretty simple. Do you know what an upstander and a bystander is? Well, I'm going to tell you. So my wife, Mrs. Woodman, used to be a 5th grade teacher. And over the past couple of months, she's been helping our granddaughters with some of their schoolwork. And one of the units that they were doing is about upstanders and bystanders. So, here's an example. You're at the playground, and you see a bunch of kids picking on another kid. And you see this, and you know it's wrong, and you go to tell an adult. Do you think that's being a bystander or an upstander? I'm listening. So an upstander is standing up for something that you know is right. And a bystander is not doing anything, just letting it go. So in the Bible passage we just heard, God is telling us that we need to be upstanders. We need to stand up for people who are getting picked on. People who are lonely, people who are hungry, people who need help. We need to be an upstander and not a bystander. Tell me this. Let's think about Jesus for a minute. Was Jesus an upstander or a bystander? Yes! Yes! Maybe the greatest upstander there ever was. So, here's another example. You were with your friends, maybe at a time when we're not all wearing masks, and you notice that someone is all by themselves, and they're lonely. What do you think an upstander would do? Yes, Eva? Help them? Make them not lonely. Absolutely. What would a bystander do? Yes, girls. At the same time, let's hear it. What does a bystander do? Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, in a minute, we're going to play a song. And we don't have the ability right now to do it as a video, which it is. But it's a song about being an upstander and what it takes to be an upstander, even though it doesn't use that word exactly. So, it's sung by our children's choir. And you'll see a picture of what they look like. And it's all about somebody who needs to have an upstander to help them. So I'm going to read you the words so that you'll better understand it when we show it in just a minute. It's called You Will Be Found. Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Well, let that lonely feeling wash away. Maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. Because when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. And oh, someone will come running. And I know they'll take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, because you'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found. You will be found. So I'm going to play it now, like magic from my phone.
Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Well, let that lonely feeling wash away. Maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. 'Cause when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. And someone will come running, and I know they'll take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found.
What'd you think? Pretty good? Okay. Thank you for watching and listening, so why don't you head on back with your folks.
Good morning. It's funny hearing the muffled greetings through all of these masks, but you know, we do what we've got to do. It's so good to see all of you here today. And welcome back. As Anita Sampson put it most prophetically 100 years ago when she was born into the Spanish flu pandemic, she said, "We've come home to a whole new world." And that certainly is the case. We mentioned last week that since coronavirus, we are not arriving back to a church or a worship experience that much resembles the previous one. That it's a new church, and not just here, but all across the nation, all across the world. And I stand by my hunch, which is that God just might have wanted it that way. Well, I think we can say the same about our nation. After 3 weeks now of protest marches against racial injustice, 5 memorials for George Floyd, and multiple millions literally across the globe crying out for social reform. A flame was ignited that just simply won't go out now. Just as Leonardo da Vinci predicted, once you see the world through a different lens, one that pushes its way into your view until it permeates all that you see and all that you interpret, and it influences much of what you do, it is a vision we are no longer able to unsee. It's a story that insists on being told and retold until it sinks in and eventually changes our behavior. And we have found ourselves, unknowingly perhaps, and certainly unintentionally, in such a moment. And just as we spoke last week of now being able to offer anyone in our congregation the idea of coming home to church through virtual and technological mechanisms, regardless of their ability to be physically present here, we are also now on a unique precipice, one hoisted upon us by God and by social conscience, to actively discern how you and I, can participate in extending a welcome home to the marginalized parts of our society. When I worked with the homeless population in San Diego in the early 2000s, one discovery that I made in both my research but also my anecdotal interactions with them was that homelessness was not merely a circumstance of not having a roof over one's head at the end of the day or a bedroom to call your own. It was more accurately described as the lack of being at home. It was a lack of at-homeness that they would describe, having no place that reinforced the idea that they belonged there, that their presence added to the aggregate value of the place or the experience or the lives of the people that were sharing space with them. That was the cruel reality of true homelessness, regardless whether they had a place to go at night. One that emergency and even long-term shelters could not assuage. The homecoming, the at-homeness that never happened. That's what we are seeing reacted to in the streets and cities across the globe. The public outrage at the violence toward Black and other disenfranchised citizens, stealing away their ability to be at home, making it instead a place that they are raised from childhood and taught to be afraid of. The African American community wants to come home too, and they deserve the right to call this home no less than you or I do. But they've had to fight for that simple right for generations, all the while being resented for fighting for it by power holders and politicians in every pocket of our nation. We spoke last week that God has something to say about that. Well, God has a lot to say about that. But one particularly scathing rebuke for a lack of action toward injustice is found in the reading that you just heard Pastor Dan give. The words of Isaiah should haunt us toward action, toward repentance. They should chase us into doing something, into finding our place where we can extend to others what we have so easily been given ourselves. I'd like to read a truncated version of that 58th chapter of that book, and I ask you to listen to it this time with the backdrop of who we are and how we are currently acting as a nation, politically, religiously, morally. He references Israel's practice of a one-day ritual fast. And so see how closely his words reflect what we are living out in the country today, both as a nation and also as a church. Shout aloud, he says. Don't hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet and declare to my people their sin. For day after day they seek me out as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken me. They ask me for just decisions, and they seem eager for God to come to them. Yet on the day of their fasting, they do as they please. They exploit their workers. Their religious rituals end in quarreling and strife and striking each other with fists. You cannot fast in this way, God says, and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is that what you call an acceptable ritual to me? Only one day for you to humble yourselves? This is live, so when we send you out the YouTube link you'll get a nice big earful of that as well. So at this point in this chapter, God sounds pretty angry, and he is, and I'm pretty sure you would agree. There's a television screenwriter that wrote in a show very recently, anger's not so bad. It reminds us that something isn't right, and we need to fix it. So Isaiah continues. This is the kind of fast that would please me, he says, that I have chosen for you. This would tip the scales for me, to loose the chains of injustice, to break the cords of the unrighteous yoke, in other words, the unfair burden, and to set the oppressed free. Is it not to share your food with the hungry, and provide the poor wanderer, the homeless, with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not turn away your own flesh and blood. If you do this, Isaiah says, then your light will break forth like the dawn, your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. God shows up when we step into that behavior, when we take that action, when we look to those marginalized, disenfranchised, and say, they are our responsibility. Do that. Walk in those footsteps, and God shows up. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, and with the pointing finger and the malicious talk, this is Isaiah continuing, if you spend yourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness. And God will guide you and satisfy your needs and strengthen your constitution. And you will be like a well-watered garden. And you will rebuild the ancient ruins. And you will be called a repairer of broken walls. What a nomenclature to be able to have God say about you. A restorer of ancient ruins and a repairer of broken walls. Jesus called it something different in Matthew chapter 5. He said, "Blessed are those that go about making peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. They will be identified as God's children." But that word is not simply offspring. That word means God's spokesman. Blessed are the peacemakers. They speak for God. That's what Jesus said. We have an opportunity right in front of us, right now, while history is being made, to participate in that. But more than an opportunity, we have a responsibility to take the words of God that we hear from the Scriptures and do something with them. To extend a new and different and deeper welcome home to those around us who have not yet been granted it. They can be friends, colleagues, co-workers, fellow students, your neighbors, or even strangers that you see every day but have yet to say hello to. And that welcome can come in many forms. It can be marching in a protest or making a phone call. It can be inviting someone over for a meal or storming the office of your senator and congressman. The point is, you have a voice to make heard. You have a hand to reach out and a heart that you can make insist that its values be reflected in the world that you live in. John Oliver said this last week so aptly. And yes, I watch the John Oliver show on HBO. Black communities, he said, have had to be perpetual activists while at the same time also being routinely disenfranchised, and it is long past time that the rest of us should make sure that their voices are heard and acted upon, because it's going to be far too easy for nothing to be meaningfully changed if we don't. And I full-heartedly agree. Reverend Stephen Wells, he's the senior pastor of South Main Baptist Church in Houston. He said this at George Floyd's memorial service last Tuesday. "Unless we are as brave as those who invited me, a white pastor, to this black man's funeral, nothing will change. We will simply do over and over again what we have done over and over before. So it has to be different this time. We have to take up the work of racial justice, because racism didn't start in our lifetime," he said, "but it can end in our lifetime. But only if you and I ask what we're going to do about it, while it's still bothering us. Not talking and not acting is the path to destruction." And he was so right. The song we just heard that Dan talked to the children about. When you don't feel strong enough to stand, it says, someone will come running to take you home. Are you someone that needs to find a home? Socially, culturally, societally? I want to believe that we somehow, someone in this room or we collectively, could extend that to you in some small way. And if you know someone or know of a way, or just have it beating in your heart to try to find a way to be the one that does that chasing, that does that running, to find someone to introduce home to them, you need to follow that impulse. What will your contribution be? What will your voice or your hand or your determination bring about? Remember when I quoted Jeff Zeleny last week? He was at the Lincoln Memorial and he said, "The protest ended here and the monuments are watching." Well, it's more than just the monuments. The nation is watching. They're watching to see who's going to show up and insist on being heard. Will we? Hebrews 12 said, "The cloud of witnesses, all those saints who went before us, they're watching. They're waiting to see what you and I will do." I want to close with the resonant words of others, some authors and theologians, essayists who earned the right to be heard, I think, by the sheer weight of their contribution to the good of society. We heard two of them already. Martin Luther King said, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. It doesn't just happen. We don't just progress as a society. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. The tireless exertions and passionate concerns of dedicated individuals." Thomas Aquinas said, "Justice is a certain rectitude of mind, whereby a man does what he ought to do in the circumstances confronting him." We heard the words of Desmond Tutu, "Exclusion is never the way forward on our shared paths to freedom and justice." And then we cap it off with the admonishment of George Will, who said, all too truly, "In life's unforgiving arithmetic, we are the sum of our choices." We are the sum of our choices. Would you pray with me, please? Loving God, as we sit and acknowledge how much in life we have benefited from, we also acknowledge that we know personally others who have not been so fortunate. Thank you for bringing us home here in all the ways that has happened for us. And thank you that we have a place to call home. And thank you for all that you give us that we take for granted, for which we are not nearly grateful enough. So God, keep us mindful in the midst of our nation's struggle to better itself. Keep us mindful of how we are meant to engage that struggle, to step into it, to have a voice in it, and how to be faithful people of God throughout it. Dear God, give us thoughtful courage, godly wisdom. Give us daring, and give us compassion as we continue to move forward as a church, and hopefully as voice in this community, insisting on being heard. Amen. We are going to close today's service with a ritual. It's a candle ritual. It's a moment, a chance to show your desire to commit to doing something when you leave here. It's just between you and God. As you leave, a deliberate action, a sign of your intention to respond to today's charge and all that's happening out there in this world. A thoughtful approach, a consideration of doing something, whatever is within your capacity to do, to extend the idea of welcoming home to someone who doesn't have it yet, whether in their own life or in this country where we live. So we're going to invite you to come up and leave slowly, just like we did last week. But on your way out is a table that was just set up with many unlit candles, one that is lit in the center. We want to invite you to give thought as you prepare to leave this place and leave this service to what you can do, what commitment you want to make to yourself and to your God in this next week, in this next month, to respond to a call to action this morning. Come up deliberately, intentionally, thoughtfully to the table on your way out. And as a sign of your joining this struggle for justice, light one candle as you leave, if that is where your heart is. Isaiah said that if you perpetuate acts of justice, your light will break forth and your righteousness will go before you. And then he says, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. You can be an expression, an incarnation, a vehicle for that glory, for God showing up. For his glory to envelop the earth, and here in Leominster, and in Massachusetts. So, as we leave, before we go, I'm going to invite you to stand in a moment and sing a simple yet poignant song that underscores those words of Isaiah, that will allow you to carry that message home with you. And the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea. And after we sing this a couple times through, Pastor Dan, like we did last week, is going to direct each section one at a time, to leave slowly. Let's stand again. Song goes like this. And the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea. And the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea. Let's try it together. And the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea. And the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the
shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea, and the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea.
Please be seated for now. I will come around and dismiss you by cue, starting with this section, so wait for me to come. And as you exit, there are 2 bowls with unlit candles. Select one from either one of the bowls, light it from the center candle, and place it in the center bowl. And as a reminder, you will notice the offering plates that are there also on your way out. So I'm going to put my mask on to be safe.
And the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea, and the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, just like the waters cover the sea, just like the waters cover the sea.
Okay.